Hello everyone! So last time when I did the Chelicerate Leviathan, or just the Chelicerate, I made a little painting of it, and I wanted to do that again with the Reaper Leviathan, so I got this little canvas here. I was all set to do this until, one day I was at Michael's and they were having a sale on canvases, and I couldn't help myself. So I threw the canvas on my easel and started painting. I'm actually working from a screenshot I got of the Reaper in-game, and it's gonna be looking up at the Reaper from underwater. So the background is just gonna be the water, looking up at it from below. So I'm working lighter blue in the middle, fading to darker blue as we get to the edge of the canvas. Once that's completely dry, I sketch in a Reaper off camera and then start painting it in white. I'm not about to paint freehand a whole Reaper on camera. That's just asking for trouble, honestly. Now obviously, since we're looking up at the Reaper, it's not going to be shaded white, it's actually going to be shaded the shade of blue. I said shade way too many times there. I'll put the screenshot up, what I'm referencing that I got in-game, just so you can see the colors and what I'm working with here. Once I got a couple coats of that darker color on, I go in with a slightly lighter shade and just bring out all the details and give it some depth and shape. It's just things that I couldn't do with the darker color. And if you're curious about why my iPad is right under the easel, it's because I have a picture of the screenshot that I'm referencing for the whole painting. Then I start to paint in everything that would normally be red, but in this case it's going to be purple just because of basic color theory, red and blue make purple. So I start painting those in. And as you can see here, the purple I used was really dark, so I actually went in with a lighter shade over it. Looking back on it now, I do actually wish that I stuck with the darker version of it, just because I personally think it looks better. But I don't know, tell me what you guys think. And there will be more pictures of it at the end of the video. To finish this off, I paint all the edges black because I'm not an animal and I don't leave unfinished edges on my canvas. And now we can start on the actual doll. I got this Barbie doll at a thrift store, so I figured she's perfect to give a makeover to. I specifically picked her out for the Reaper because of the chest joint she has, and also because one of her legs has a part of it busted off. So she was going to become a mermaid or something either way. I obviously do all the normal prepping stuff. I cut off her hair, take her head off, fish all the plugs out, and wipe off her face. I'm not going to bore you too much with the whole process since I'm sure most of you are familiar with it. Then I shift gears from the face to the tail. First, I have to rip her legs off. The first one came off pretty easily, but I did get some help removing the other one. Once the legs are off, it's still got these big white plastic joints on it. I managed to get those off and drill a hole right through it. It actually makes the perfect anchoring here for the tail, which is really good. I run a length of wire through the drill hole and then twist it both up for added strength. Once it's completely twisted up, I make a mock-up out of some felt for the tail, and then I can actually get to work on the tail. I used this off-white fabric that I got at the fabric store because I am an idiot. And I had been looking at the blue version of a Reaper for my painting for so long, that I forgot that the Reaper was not off-white like I thought, but is just completely white. The moment I realized this though, it was way too late to change it, so we're just gonna have to be stuck with this now. Moving right along from that embarrassing explanation, I trace the tail onto the fabric with my disappearing ink pen. Then I cut it out, leaving a little bit of seam allowance on it, and I actually fray check the entire edge so it doesn't fray. And then I cut out a second one and sew them together, right sides together. I do a back stitch around the entire edge, and once that's done, I turn it right side out. Then I just stick the doll in, wire and all, and it goes up to the torso joint. This is going to be important for later. Then I just stuff the tail full of fluff to give it some shape, and also hide the wire better inside. And I didn't mention this earlier, but I did take a Dremel tool and sand off the chest of the doll, because whenever I make a mermaid, I personally sand them off because they are fish and they do not have boobs. Now for a while I was panicking on how I would hide the raw edge of the tail, but then I just thought, I'll just tuck it under the torso joint. So I trace out where that is and then just glue it on, making sure it's gonna be completely hidden by this torso joint. I cram her head back on at this point because the modifications I'm going to do to her head, I don't want to try and cram it back on once those are on. Then I cut out holes for the eyes because this doll had eyelashes, actual eyelashes, and I wasn't completely able to hide those, and I don't want it to be a raised texture, so I just cut them out of the face. Then I cut a big hole in the back of the head because I'm going to insert armature wire for the mandibles, and this is just going to make it easier to secure those in place. I take a thumbtack and poke holes of where I marked where the mandibles or the armature wire for them are going to go. Then I insert the wire. For each one, I bend the wire so it's harder to get out, and then further secure it in with hot glue. I know it's not the strongest, but it's what I got. Once all the wire is in, and it's thoroughly looking like metal whiskers at this point, I bend them in place to make the actual mandibles. I made sure to give myself plenty of extra length on the wires, just in case I messed up or anything. I fill in the holes in her eyes with clay. I didn't want to try resin eyes because 1, I don't have resin, and 2, resin is expensive, so I would much rather just use clay for this. Once that's dry and I won't be able to squish it, I wrap clay around the armature wire to build up the mandibles. I was also going to attempt to sculpt some 3D teeth, as you can see here, but that ends up looking really weird, and I just dig the clay out and paint on the teeth later. And there's also the obvious thing of having to patch up the big holes in the chest. That's kind of the downside of sanding off the chest, honestly. I also put on some tiny little raised eyes like it did for the cheliceret, however you want to say it, and add some extra details to the mandibles now that the base layer of clay is dry. Then I also sculpt on the horn shape on the head. At this point, I don't need to access the back of the head anymore, so I just glue that up, and I also glue on the horn to the front of the head. Once I'm sure all the glue is like really dry so I don't squish anything out of place, I can finally start painting this doll. And I hate color matching, but for this I think I managed to get the tail and the paint color to match like perfectly. Once the base coat is completely on the doll, I can flip her over and start to work on the red pattern along the back and along the arms and stuff. For this, I was actually referencing pictures of a Reaper straight from the game. It's also when I first realized that I chose the wrong color for the body, but obviously at this point it's way too late to change it. Yay! Bring the base of red all the way down the tail, then add the little squiggly line details. I actually really like how this came out, and I used some of like the tan paint to paint in some other little squiggles in it to make it more distinct. I enjoyed doing this actually. I thought it would be like really long and tedious, but it actually wasn't, surprisingly. The Reaper's body actually translates surprisingly well to a mermaid. On her lower arms, I paint in red, like the same color I did down her back, and fade that into the cream color of her body. Then I take a darker red for her hands and blend that in with the red. And then I paint the very tip of her nails black. I move up to the mandibles and do the exact same thing, putting down the base coat of red, then the darker red, then the black on the actual, like, mandible part of it. It took over halfway through the video, but we're finally at the face. I paint in all four of her eyes black, then take a really tiny brush and paint in the teeth. I actually forgot to mention this during the sculpting phase, but when I was sculpting her, I used some clay to actually give her a cleft chin, because that's the closest thing I could get to what the Reaper has, and then I just paint in some red detailing on that. It actually looks really weird before I cut it, like when it's all long like this, but I do get it trimmed down. Now I can actually get into the last part, making the fins. I cut these shapes out of paper first and then cut 2 of each of these out of felt. Then I just pinned them together and cut them out to be more rounded and, obviously less rectangular because that's not what the fins look like. I actually end up gluing on the fins to the tail. I was originally going to sew them because of the added strength and security it would have. But the stitches on this scale were way too obvious, so I opted for just gluing it on for how it looks. Then I cut these shapes out, which are also fin pieces, and glue those on as well, because, again, the stitches would be too obvious on this scale. The final step, I make sure those back fins are sewn upwards so they stick up, and then paint on some red, it's a red fade that goes from the tip of the fin and fades into the cream color of the tail. And then finally, she's done. I'm really sorry that this video took so long. School started up recently again and my motivation just went into the toilet. So I'll try really hard not to let that happen in the future. See ya!